The vast chambers of the Galactic Concord were filled with the hum of distant conversations and the low murmur of alien voices. At the center, the High Council convened, its members an array of species from across the galaxy. They were beings of incomprehensible intelligence, towering over humanity in both technology and physical form. And today, they had gathered to discuss the fate of a species that had recently been granted a place in their interstellar community: humanity. Earth had been a curiosity at first, a relatively unimportant, underdeveloped planet in the far reaches of space. Still, humanity had managed to stumble its way into the galactic fold. The aliens observed their primitive history with a mix of amusement and distaste. Wars over oil, petty politics, religious strife, and then the rapid, almost reckless expansion into space. It all seemed so chaotic, so fragile. Now, at the urging of several member species, the Concord had decided to conduct a thorough review of humanity. This wasn't unusual. Many races had undergone similar evaluations. But what made humanity different was the overwhelming consensus among the Concord members. The humans were the weakest species in the galaxy. A blue-skinned diplomat from the Kuloth, a race of scholars, spoke first. Their bodies are so fragile. No natural defense mechanisms, no extra limbs, no formidable armor like many of the species we encounter. Their bones are porous, easily fractured. Their bodies require constant sustenance. Even their senses are weak compared to ours. They lack even the ability to communicate through telepathy, a skill so common among the species of the Concord. "Quite right," replied a towering insectoid leader from Talcor. "Their technology is primitive at best. They've barely mastered interstellar travel, relying on fusion propulsion systems that we abandoned millennia ago. Their weapons, crude lasers and missiles, wouldn't even make a dent against our fleets." A silent murmur passed through the room. The Galethians, a race of sentient plants, added, "Their social structures are unstable. They operate on emotion, not logic. Their governments are inefficient. Their military is disorganized. They're constantly fighting each other. They lack unity, discipline. They are weak." As the council's deliberations continued, a cold conclusion settled over the proceedings. Humanity's inclusion in the Concord had been a mistake. If Earth had ever been viewed as a curiosity, it was now viewed with barely disguised contempt. The decision was unanimous. Humanity was not a threat. In fact, they were too weak to pose any threat at all. The other races could safely ignore them, focusing on more pressing matters. That was when the Salveri Empire, a ruthless and highly disciplined race of warlords, made its move. "Humanity has no place here," the Kuloth diplomat concluded, the final word hanging in the air. At that exact moment, a message came through the Concord's intergalactic communication network. The Salveri had declared war, not on the Concord, but on Earth. The message was short, brutal, and utterly direct. "Your weakest race will be extinguished first. We begin the eradication." The Council, once so confident in their assessment of humanity's frailty, sat in stunned silence. They had underestimated them. The Salveri Empire wasted no time. They had declared war, and within hours, their vast fleet of warships descended on Earth, unchallenged by any defense humanity had. Their ships were massive, sleek, and terrifying, covered in dark, smooth armor that gleamed like obsidian in the cold light of space. The first wave was relentless, an assault so overwhelming that no one had expected it. Cities fell like dominoes, each explosion on Earth a testament to the power of the invaders. New York City was the first to be reduced to rubble. 100 nuclear-grade bombs fell, not from the sky, but from the Salveri ships hovering overhead. The streets, once teeming with life, now became craters. Buildings collapsed under the weight of unimaginable force. The people below, unaware of the incoming destruction, were caught in an instant of pure terror. Within hours, the entire eastern seaboard was a war zone, with no survivors to tell the tale. On the west coast, Los Angeles had a slightly different fate. The Salveri chose to take their time, landing their massive war machines on the outskirts of the city, flattening everything in their path. The air grew thick with smoke as the battle raged, but the human resistance, though small, began to fight back. But it was clear. They were outmatched, outgunned, and out of time. The Concorde watched from the comfort of their pristine homeworlds, distant and unmoved. They didn't expect anything more. It was just as they had predicted. Humanity would crumble. The war would be over in a matter of days, and Earth would become just another dead world, a reminder of the folly of the weaker species who had once thought themselves equal. But humanity, despite everything, refused to break. They didn't collapse in fear. They didn't fall to despair. Instead, they did something the Salveri had never expected. They scattered. In every city across Earth, civilians vanished into the underground, into caves, forests, and tunnels. Despite the destruction, the human spirit endured. Resistance groups formed in the shadows. People who had once been ordinary citizens now fought with every ounce of will they had. They used the rubble of their cities, the remnants of the war machines, and the scavenged technology to fight back, no matter how hopeless it seemed. In small towns across America, in the heart of Europe, and deep in the jungles of Africa, humans gathered in secret, desperate, and defiant. Their weaponry was primitive compared to the Salveri's advanced armaments, but what they lacked in firepower, they made up for in sheer determination. A small group of scientists, led by Dr. Sarah Tate, an expert in reverse engineering, became the first to make a breakthrough. Using wreckage from a downed Salveri drone, they managed to unlock the secrets of the enemy's communication system. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They could now intercept Salveri transmissions, learn their movements, and just maybe disrupt their operations. Humanity wasn't dead. It was bruised, battered, and reeling from the devastating blow. But it wasn't done. Somewhere in the ruins of a former metropolis, a lone figure stood among the ashes. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands covered in the grime of war, but there was a fire in him, a stubborn, unyielding light. "We fight," he whispered to himself, a promise, a declaration. "We fight." And thus, the real war began. Humanity was down, but not out. As the Salveri continued their relentless assault on Earth, something unexpected began to happen. The scattered pockets of human resistance weren't just surviving. They were learning, and they were learning fast. Within weeks, Dr. Sarah Tate and her team of engineers and scientists made a shocking discovery. The Salveri tech, advanced though it was, had flaws, subtle weaknesses. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. And the humans, in their desperation, had figured out how to exploit it. A patchwork of salvage technology from fallen Salveri drones, combined with old human ingenuity, led to a breakthrough. They reverse-engineered a Salveri communications device and adapted it to send false signals that scrambled the enemy's targeting systems. The Salveri ships, capable of tearing through entire fleets, suddenly found themselves unable to lock on to human targets. Even the most advanced Salveri AI couldn't make sense of the interference. Meanwhile, scattered human forces, armed with barely functioning rifles and basic explosives, started using guerrilla tactics, and the results were staggering. No longer were they just running from the Salveri. Now, they were turning the tables. Ambushes, sabotage, lightning-fast strikes on vulnerable targets. They sabotaged Salveri supply routes using nothing but crude tools and explosive materials they scavenged from the wreckage of destroyed warships. In North America, a small resistance group known as the Black Hawk Battalion managed to cripple a Salveri fuel depot in the Great Plains. Using old military trucks, they set up a trap and lured in an enemy convoy. Once the fuel tanks were destroyed, the explosion lit up the night sky like a fiery beacon of hope. The Salveri didn't know it yet, but their supply chain was falling apart. The humans didn't stop there. A group of hackers, barely out of their teens, found a way to hijack a fleet of Salveri drones, turning the very weapons of their enemies against them. Using nothing but their laptops and makeshift transmitters, they caused chaos across multiple fronts. A dozen Salveri warships went rogue, firing on their own command fleet. The Salveri, known for their impenetrable order, couldn't comprehend what was happening. The Concord began to take notice. "The humans are adapting too quickly," one of the high-ranking officials, a member of the Leru species, said with a voice tinged with anxiety. The Leru were a race of expert tacticians, but even they were taken aback by the rate at which humanity was learning. Their weaknesses are still there, their biology, their lack of cohesion, but they compensate by thinking outside the box. It's unsettling. The Salveri had initially dismissed humanity as an easy conquest. The invaders, masters of militaristic precision, assumed their superior technology would overwhelm Earth's primitive forces. But they hadn't counted on human innovation, on humanity's uncanny ability to adapt to the most hopeless of situations. Now the tide was starting to turn, albeit slowly. The humans, previously regarded as a footnote in the galaxy, were proving that their strength was not in their bodies or their technology. It was in their minds. Their refusal to give up, no matter how dire the situation, was beginning to shift the balance. And as the weeks passed, word spread through the human ranks. One message became a rallying cry. "We are not the weak ones. We just haven't shown our true strength yet." In the depths of Earth's darkest hours, humanity was finding its purpose. And with every passing day, the Salveri Empire's confidence began to crack. The Salveri Empire had been bred for order. Their fleets operated like well-oiled machines, their battle strategies precise, their every move calculated with ruthless efficiency. They were the embodiment of discipline, a species that prided itself on control and predictability. But what they didn't understand, what no one had warned them about, was that humanity wasn't bound by logic, and certainly not by order. The Salveri had assumed that once they had Earth's cities destroyed, once they had crushed the human military, the rest of the planet would collapse. But there was something profoundly unsettling about the humans, their unpredictability. It was something the Salveri, so accustomed to methodical victories, couldn't quite grasp. In the heart of a decimated city in Europe, a group of human survivors, barely more than civilians, had launched an attack on a Salveri communications relay. But this wasn't just any attack. It was a full-on carnival of madness. They didn't sneak in under cover of darkness. They didn't use the carefully crafted strategies that were starting to become common among the more organized resistance groups. No, they threw caution to the wind and attacked in broad daylight, with everything they had. They strapped explosives to bicycles, set up improvised rocket launchers made from household pipes, and even rigged a car with explosives to drive straight into a Salveri command center. The whole thing felt more like a circus than a military assault, but somehow it worked. The Salveri, who had been trained to anticipate calculated moves, were thrown into disarray. Their heavily armored patrols were taken by surprise. In the chaos, even the most disciplined Salveri soldiers didn't know how to respond. The assault lasted only minutes, but it was enough to cripple the relay. Meanwhile, in the jungles of South America, a small group of guerrilla fighters launched a series of attacks that had the Salveri questioning their own tactics. They didn't attack in the expected locations or times. They used old-fashioned human distractions, things like radio broadcasts of human jokes, memes, and strange music that left the enemy soldiers confused, disoriented, and questioning the sanity of their foes. The Salveri commander in charge of the sector found his fleet unable to communicate properly, unable to focus on the fight, as strange human broadcasts distorted their frequency and disrupted their operations. The music and laughter became a psychological weapon. The Salveri didn't understand it. They couldn't make sense of it. How could a species with no telepathic communication no advanced manipulation of energy fields, and no hyper-efficient battle tactics fight back so effectively. Humanity's tactics were a chaos of contradictions, a messy, unpredictable storm of creative solutions to problems that the HFY couldn't even fathom. They didn't think in straight lines. They didn't think in the way the HFY did. They didn't have to. The Concord, who had once viewed humanity as a weak link in the galaxy, started receiving reports from their surveillance fleets. Every day, the numbers grew. Humans were consistently outsmarting the HFY. Every small victory, every ambush, every hit-and-run attack was adding up. The humans were beginning to fracture the Empire's sense of control, and they were doing it with something the HFY had never counted on: madness. A human captain, known only as Captain Walker, sent a message to the Galactic Concord, one that made its way across the stars. It was simple, direct, and absolutely baffling to the Council that had once dismissed humanity. You think you can predict us. You think you can control us. Watch us make a mess of your plans. Chaos is our weapon. And we're just getting started. The Concord, once confident that humanity was a joke, now found themselves staring down the barrel of something far more dangerous than they had imagined. An enemy they couldn't predict. An enemy that, despite all their flaws, refused to bow to the expectations of anyone, not even themselves. As the human resistance continued to grow and adapt, the ripple effects were felt far beyond Earth. In the galaxy's darkest corners, far from the chaos of the war, rumors spread, whispers of humanity's unexpected resistance against the mighty HFY. Initially, these rumors were dismissed as exaggerations or the delusions of desperate minds. But as human victories began to stack up, more and more species took notice. On the peaceful, aquatic world of Veshan 4, a race of highly intelligent but non-violent beings, the Veshans, first heard the stories of human ingenuity. The Veshans had always valued philosophy and diplomacy over warfare, but they had watched humanity's struggle unfold with a growing sense of urgency. If humans, a species they had long considered primitive, could stand against the HFY, perhaps they could do the same. In the far reaches of the galaxy, the insectoid miners of Talkar, known for their stubbornness and resilience, began to discuss the possibility of rebellion. The Talkar had always been oppressed by the HFY's demands for resources, forced to work endless shifts in the Empire's resource fields. They had been subjugated for generations, too scared to rise up. But the humans? They were doing the impossible. If they could fight back, surely they could too. On the industrial world of Korath, a race of highly adaptive beings who specialized in mechanical engineering and trade, the news of human sabotage spread like wildfire. The Korathians had never been a militaristic people, but they had always possessed the deep respect for the practicality of human innovation. They saw how humanity had turned discarded technology into weapons of resistance and thought. If they can do that, so can we. And so the first underground cells of Korathian freedom fighters began to form. The galaxy's outer rim saw similar movements. The Psychorians, a once dominant species now reduced to nothing more than scavengers, used to sell their goods to the HFY. But seeing humanity's success, they began to reconsider their role. They, too, could turn their scattered resources into tools of war, using human tactics in the only way they knew how, by adapting and improvising. It wasn't just in small, fringe species that hope began to rise. Among the larger, more established powers, murmurs of change began to surface. The Kairoths, a race of cold-blooded, militaristic beings, had long held the belief that the HFY were invincible. But as the HFY faltered in the face of humanity's guerrilla tactics, Kairoth officials started rethinking their loyalty to the Empire. If the humans could fight back so fiercely, maybe the HFY weren't the future of the galaxy after all. The shift was subtle at first, minor defections, small acts of sabotage. But soon, an unspoken truth spread. Humanity had ignited something across the stars. They had sparked a revolution. Now, the most unlikely of alliances began to form. The resistance didn't just consist of humans anymore. It was a motley coalition of species, some old, some new, some still emerging from the wreckage of the Xalvari's oppression. The enemies of the Xalvari began to understand the true power of humanity's defiance. It wasn't just their ability to adapt. It was their ability to inspire others to do the same. Humanity had sparked something far greater than a mere rebellion. It was a galaxy-wide resistance. From the smallest ships to the largest battle fleets, the fight against the Xalvari was no longer just a human struggle. It was a struggle for all sentient beings who had been crushed beneath the boot of the Empire. And for the first time, the Xalvari had to face the terrifying possibility that they weren't invincible. The war was no longer just about one planet. It had become a war for the galaxy's future. The galaxy had begun to shift in ways that Xalvari had never anticipated. The resistance, once a ragtag collection of desperate humans and a few brave outliers, was now a full-scale rebellion. What had started on Earth had rippled through the stars, as species previously bent under the Xalvari boot now rallied to humanity's cause. The spark they had ignited was becoming a fire, and the Xalvari were starting to feel the heat. The first major victory came on the mineral-rich world of Karnak 7. It was a world the Xalvari had turned into a fortress, a stronghold surrounded by layers of impenetrable defenses and advanced weaponry. The Xalvari had expected no challenge from the weaker species in the galaxy, especially the humans. But the humans, with their newfound allies, had other plans. In the dead of night, a combined fleet of human ships, Korathian miners, and Talkar guerrillas launched a surprise attack. The strategy was simple, yet brilliant. Using old human stealth technology, they managed to slip past the Xalvari's outer defenses. The resistance didn't rely on sheer firepower. They used deception, cunning, and coordinated strikes at critical points. The Korathians, masters of engineering, had modified a series of old human freighters to function as decoys. The Xalvari, eager to counter the apparent threat, split their forces to deal with the false targets, leaving their central command vulnerable. The attack on Karnak 7 was swift, brutal, and effective. Within hours, the Xalvari's main command center was taken. The remaining Xalvari soldiers, caught in a web of confusion and chaos, were overwhelmed. For the first time in the war, the resistance had scored a decisive victory. The human-led alliance held Karnak 7, and the Xalvari were forced to retreat. The significance of this victory was immediate and far-reaching. News of the victory spread like wildfire across the galaxy. It wasn't just a symbolic win. It was a major blow to the Xalvari's pride. They had believed themselves invincible, yet a ragtag group of humans and their allies had shattered that illusion. The Xalvari fleet, once the most feared in the galaxy, now faced an enemy they could no longer predict nor contain. The Galactic Concord, long aloof from the war, began to watch the situation unfold with growing concern. They had dismissed humanity as a minor annoyance, a species whose weakness would inevitably lead to their downfall. But now, they saw the tides of war turning. The humans were no longer just survivors. They were becoming a force that could challenge the balance of power in the galaxy. A council meeting of the Concord was hastily called, with representatives of the largest galactic factions. The Kuloth, the Galathians, and the Kairoths, all gathered to discuss the ramifications of the recent events. The Kuloth representative, known for their cautious nature, spoke first. "We've underestimated the humans. They've demonstrated an adaptability we never thought possible." The Galathian leader, always one to observe the flow of events before taking action, added, "Their chaos, it's their greatest strength. The Xalvari cannot deal with unpredictability. But we must ask ourselves, can we? If this war continues to spread, it will engulf us all. We must act before it's too late." The Kairoths, typically cold and calculating, exchanged uneasy glances. "It is time we take a side in this war," their leader, a towering figure of strength and intellect, declared. The Salveri are no longer invincible, but humanity may be the key to unseating their rule. The mood in the room shifted. The Concord, once united under their belief in the Salveri's supremacy, now found themselves divided. Some factions feared humanity's growing power and the instability they brought. Others saw the potential in aligning with the humans. Regardless of their stance, one thing was certain. The Salveri's grip on the galaxy was weakening, and a new power was emerging, one that couldn't be ignored. Back on Earth, the humans were readying for the next phase of the war. Captain Walker, now a symbol of the human-led resistance, knew the stakes had never been higher. The victory at Karnak 7 was just the beginning. With the tide turning in their favor, they had to strike while the iron was hot. The next target, the heart of the Salveri Empire itself. The victory at Karnak 7 sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Salveri, once the undisputed rulers of countless worlds, now found their empire fractured. For the first time, they were no longer the ones dictating the terms of the war. It was the humans, with their unpredictable tactics, their chaos, who were setting the course. On Earth, the human resistance was preparing for their next move. Captain Walker, now a symbol of the rebellion, stood before a large holographic map of the Salveri Empire. The war was no longer just about survival. It was about taking the fight directly to the heart of the enemy. Karnak 7 was just the beginning, Walker said, his voice steady but resolute. We've hit them where it hurts, but we need to hit harder. If we're going to end this, we need to take their core, the Salveri homeworld. For Zalmak. Zalmak was the jewel of the Salveri Empire, a planet rich with resources, history, and power. Its fall would not only cripple the Salveri militarily, but would also send a message to the galaxy. The Empire was no longer invincible. If humanity could take Zalmak, they could take anything. The plan was audacious, but it was the only option left. Walker knew the risks. An all-out assault on Zalmak would be the largest, most dangerous mission humanity had ever attempted. It would take every ally they had gathered. Gorathian engineers, Talkar guerrillas, Veshan diplomats, and others who had joined the cause. They had formed an alliance, but the coming battle would test their unity, their resolve, and their strength. The strategy was simple in theory but complex in execution. They would strike in multiple waves, using a combination of subterfuge, sabotage, and direct assault. The first wave would involve a small fleet of stealth ships, capable of infiltrating Zalmak's outer defenses undetected. Their job was to plant explosives in key military installations, spaceports, energy reactors, and the massive planetary shield generators that protected the planet from orbital bombardment. The second wave would arrive after the initial chaos, a fleet of human and allied ships equipped with powerful new weapons developed using Salveri technology. The goal was to draw the Salveri fleet out of orbit and create a window for the final strike. It was a long shot, but it was the best chance they had. Walker stood in the war room, watching as the plans were finalized. He felt the weight of the moment. This was it, the endgame. If they succeeded, they could bring down the Salveri once and for all. If they failed, the galaxy would fall into the hands of an empire that had shown no mercy. But failure was not an option. "We'll make them feel every loss," Walker said, his voice low but determined. "Every battle, every life we've lost to them, we'll make them pay." As the final preparations were made, Walker received a communication from an unlikely source, the Galactic Concord. After the events on Karnak 7, they had finally made a decision. The Kairoths, who had once been staunch allies of the Salveri, had decided to join the fight. The Concord, now divided on the issue, had sent a representative to meet with the human forces. "I come to you not as a member of the Galactic Concord," the Kairoth representative, a towering figure named Korkath, said, "but as an ally. We've seen what humanity is capable of. And if you're going to take Zalmak, you won't do it alone." The Kairoths offered their fleets, their resources, and their expertise in battle strategy. It was a huge shift. The very species that had once stood alongside the Salveri were now offering their support. The tide of war had shifted completely. Walker nodded, accepting the offer. "We'll take Salmac," he said simply. "With your help, we can win this war." As the fleet assembled, preparing for the most dangerous mission humanity had ever undertaken, the realization settled in. The galaxy was on the cusp of a new era. The old order, the Salveri Empire, was crumbling. And humanity, once seen as weak and insignificant, was now leading the charge to reshape the galaxy forever. The final assault on Salmac was set in motion, and the galaxy watched with bated breath. For humanity, this was the culmination of everything they had fought for. Every sacrifice, every loss, every victory. The combined fleet of humans and their newfound allies, the Kyroths, Gorethians, Talkar, and others, formed a formidable force. Together, they were prepared to strike at the heart of the Salveri Empire, and the Salveri themselves were on edge. As the fleet gathered on the edge of Salmac's orbit, Captain Walker stood on the bridge of the lead human ship, the Vanguard, staring out at the planet below. The Salveri homeworld loomed large, a shining jewel of the galaxy, its cities and fortresses protected by powerful shields, and the full force of the Salveri military. Walker's mind raced through the plan one last time. The first wave of stealth ships had already infiltrated the Salveri defenses. Explosives were planted on key military targets, shipyards, weapon silos, and energy reactors. The second wave of ships, now in position, was ready to provide fire support, drawing the Salveri fleet out into the open. "Captain, all ships are in position," reported Commander Lila, the tactical officer. "The first wave reports that the charges are in place. We're ready to begin the attack." Walker nodded, his face grim. This was it. Begin the assault. The battle began in a flash of fire and light. The stealth ships struck first, their explosives tearing into Salveri military installations. A series of massive explosions rippled across the surface of Salmac, shaking the planet's very core. The Salveri, caught off guard by the surprise attack, scrambled to respond, sending their fleet into the skies to defend their homeworld. The second wave of ships, led by the Vanguard, burst from their hiding places and engaged the Salveri fleet head-on. The battle was intense, a chaotic clash of laser fire, missiles, and energy blasts that illuminated the dark void of space. But the Salveri, despite their superior numbers and technology, were unprepared for the tactics of their enemies. The humans and their allies fought with a ferocity and unpredictability that kept the Salveri commanders on edge. They were no longer the perfect, calculated force they had once been. They were disorganized, reacting instead of leading. In the midst of the chaos, the third phase of the plan unfolded. The human forces had developed a powerful new weapon, a modified version of Salveri energy cannons that had been reverse-engineered and adapted for their own use. With their shields weakening, the Vanguard fired a precise shot at the heart of Salmac's planetary shield generator. The beam cut through the atmosphere, tearing down the last line of defense around the planet. With the shields down, the remaining human and allied ships launched a final assault on the Salveri capital. The Salveri, their once proud fleets shattered, and their defenses in ruins, were unable to respond. The humans had done the impossible. They had breached the walls of Salmac. As the human ships closed in on the Salveri capital city, Walker gave the order. "Prepare to land. We finish this here." The final push was swift. The humans and their allies stormed the capital, overwhelming the Salveri forces that had been left behind. It wasn't just a military victory. It was a statement. The Salveri Empire had fallen, and humanity, once considered the weakest race in the galaxy, had brought it to its knees. With the surrender of the Salveri leadership, the galaxy was forever changed. The once mighty empire had crumbled under the weight of its own hubris, and humanity, united with their allies, had emerged victorious. It wasn't just the end of a war. It was the beginning of a new era. The galaxy, now free from the shadow of the Salveri, began to rebuild. New alliances were forged and old grudges were put aside. The humans, who had been underestimated from the start, were now seen as the leaders of this new galaxy. Their strength wasn't in their bodies or their technology. It was in their hearts, in their ability to adapt, to fight against impossible odds, and to inspire others to do the same. As Captain Walker looked out over the shattered ruins of the Salveri capital, he knew that the fight was over. But the journey of humanity's rise, was just beginning.